Hello, and welcome to my 517 Follow Friday series. Today, I am joined by Dr. Darla Bishop, the founder of Finansis, LLC, a boutique consulting firm based in Lansing, Michigan, and the author of How to Afford Everything. Darla, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, how are you doing? Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. Thank God it's Friday. I'm doing great. I'm happy that the week is going to be over.
Yes, yes, and it should be a good weekend.
I hope so. We don't have much planned, so that makes it a very chill weekend.
I love that.
So
I'm taking the
I
kids down to Ann Arbor for a gymnastics meet because they're really into gymnastics.
oh
And so I'm hoping that will
okay.
be a fun time.
Now, gymnastics, like getting on the bars and swinging around, or just tumbling at this point?
Oh no, well, we're gonna watch the
Oh, you're gonna watch
Michigan, we're
gymnastics.
gonna watch
Okay.
Michigan versus Michigan State, their meet.
Wow. Okay.
And so it's gonna be super good.
Awesome. So the good stuff. Okay. Not just kids doing somersaults. All right.
Oh no, no, like semi-professional college collegiate athletes. It's gonna be
Very
cool.
cool. Okay. All right. Well, why don't we start with just some background? I always like to give viewers a little bit of background about my guests, and that can be personal, it can be professional experience, just whatever you like to share with people.
Yeah, so I'm Darla Bishop. I am new-ish to Lansing. I've been in the Lansing area since early 2022. And the funny thing is people don't expect to hear what brought us here. My husband is active duty military, and they're like, why is active duty military? There's actually a military installation in town, and so
Mhm.
my husband works there. And living in Lansing has been super cool, hashtag love Lansing. And being here has been awesome. I actually lived here for a couple of years in middle school. But at
Oh,
that time, my family was going through a lot. And so I was really nervous about moving back here. Like I didn't know if driving past that Kroger or going to that part of town would bring back some of those not so happy memories. But it's actually been a really good experience living here and getting to know this place as a family person with kids and finding different things to do with them and to explore the town. So I'm actually really thankful that getting to live here again, I get to like have a really good experience living in Lansing versus the one when I was in middle school and the family was going through a lot. And so professionally, I like to call myself a multi-potentialite, but really that's just a fancy way of saying I get really interested in a lot of things all the time. And so I do a lot of things. By day, I'm a healthcare executive. I work as a director for a health insurance company based out of state. And at night, I teach public health policy classes because that's what my education is public health policy, mostly around Medicaid or health disparities. And then on nights and weekends, I do financial literacy education because that's one of the things that has really enabled me to live such a beautiful life. Understanding money as a tool, using money as a tool, and teaching other people how to use money as a tool. And money management is not just math. There's so many emotional aspects to it. And so in learning about money and the things that I believed and the things that I learned and the things that I needed to unlearn and shift, that's what kind of pushed me to be like, you know what, I got to write a book. And so that's why we're here because I wrote a book.
now, have you just always loved everything financial, or did you have some experiences that led you down this path?
I think there's like two key moments for me that changed. So growing up, I grew up in Detroit. My parents did the absolute best they could, and sometimes even more than they probably should have been able to. So it's not that they weren't good with money; they were actually creative about how to make the ends meet, keep the lights on, keep the fridge in the pantry with something in it,
Yep.
based on what they actually had coming in the door. So it wasn't about being bad with money, but what I realized is when I went to college at the University of Michigan.
Mhm.
I was a scholarship student and I had fully expected that I would have to work my way through college. But because I got this scholarship, I kind of had the opportunity to be like a student, like I had the option to work or not. I had the option to take a work study job or not. I had the option to join clubs and to be active. And what I noticed about my roommate, whose parents were from out of state, They stayed with us the entire week of moving.
Wow.
You know, they were in a hotel. They took us to dinner. They took us to Meyer, because being from out of state, Meyer was like really exciting for them. They were like, "Oh, we keep
Yeah.
hearing about this Meyer place. Like, we're really excited." And they're like, "Well, Darla, do you want to come?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." So I went with them to Meyer, and the mom kind of pulled me aside and said, "Sweetie, I noticed you didn't have much with you." And I was like, "Yeah, I've got like my two totes and my duffel bag. Like, I'm good." They're like, "No, sweetie, we know she didn't have much with it. If you anything you need, just get it. Don't worry about it. We can't come
Oh,
back and check on you girls for a few weeks. And so I don't want to be worried about you." And I was like, "I'm okay. Like, but thank you, you know?" And so when her parents finally kind of left, I remember trying to ask my roommate, "So what do your parents do?" Because I'm thinking these people must be rich. I heard them talking about writing a check for her tuition. I heard them talking about, well, when your brother comes to that football game with us, they had been in a hotel all week. She was an out-of-state student. So I'm thinking these people must be
right.
loaded. And so I asked her, like, "So what do your parents do?" And she's like, "Oh, well, my dad is a manager." And I'm like, "You sure he's not a manager and not like a VP
Yeah.
or you know, a senior or something?" And she's like, "No, he's a manager. In fact, my parents talk about it all the time because they keep trying to promote him and he always tells them no, because he's like, being a manager is perfect. I know my job, I have the perfect amount of responsibility, and I can golf." And I was like, "Okay, all right." Well, I was like, so in my brain, I'm like, "Okay, cool. Maybe her mom's the breadwinner. Her mom was beautiful. She was super smart. She was super nice. So maybe she's the breadwinner." "Oh, okay. Well, what does your mom do?" "Oh, she works at the church." "Maybe." I'm like, "What do you mean, maybe she works at the church?" She's like, "Well, she just started doing that. And I'm not sure if she actually works there or she volunteers. And she just started doing that when my brother went to college 2 years ago." So I'm like, wait a minute. These people live on a manager salary, maybe some money from the church, and have
Hmm.
two kids in college that they're writing checks for. And so I remember trying to ask more, like, I'm trying to figure out, okay, I'm poor and you're not. So why are you not poor? And just like she didn't know, just like I didn't know why I was poor, she didn't know
Right.
why she wasn't.
Hmm.
And I remember as a kid, whenever I wanted to learn something, you read a book. And
Mm-hmm.
so I found books about personal finance and about credit and about budgeting. And I used some of that time that I now had as a student who had the option to work or not to read. And learning about money, by the time I was a senior in college, I was able to save enough to have money in the bank in case I decided to leave the state. Because I thought, if I want to leave the state for a job or for graduate school, nobody
Yeah.
can help me. My parents love me. They really want the best for me. They're so proud of me, and they don't have anything to help me with. So
Nice.
if I need to be able to leave, I need to have money saved so that I can go to my future wherever that takes me. And reading all those books is what helped me understand how to work with money and things that I maybe learned that weren't so good about how to manage money, but made perfect sense for my parents in their context, but didn't make sense for me as someone who was now educated with a kind of a name brand degree
Mm-hmm.
and who had now a social network that helped me to earn more, that I needed to know how to use money for that context, not
Yep.
for making it work,
Yeah.
right?
It's interesting. And I kind of get this impression from you that your parent, you said your parents like always provided you with what you needed, that, the fridge always had food in it, all of that. I get the impression from you that you grew up not really realizing what you didn't have compared to others.
Oh no, I must have given you the wrong impression.
Okay. All
No,
right.
we were poor. We went through
Okay.
several bouts of hunger. We went
Okay.
through several bouts of what I now know is homelessness, but it didn't feel like it because we were staying with a relative
Okay.
or something, right? And I am always careful how I talk about this because I don't want to villainize the adults in my life because they absolutely were doing the best they could, and in
Right.
fact probably did more than they could. And so we definitely had some not so great times. And I have issues with food still because of the bouts we had with hunger and food
Hmm.
insecurity. But I think what has served me better is figuring out what they did right so I can
Hmm.
replicate that, and the things that
Right.
maybe don't make any sense and to do something different.
Right.
Right. Because if I focus on that bad stuff, like I'll just be a sad, depressed person. And we don't need any
Yeah.
more of those in the world.
Mm-mm. No. Now, you mentioned your book a couple times, and I know that you got that published last year. You've got your little mini series podcast out that just kind of recaps the book. Can you just give an overview of it and really how How is it different from maybe all those books you read in college, or just what else is out there right now? What sets your book apart?
Yeah, so my book is How to Afford Everything. And what I did when I was writing this book, I wanted to be really practical
Mhm.
because as I've read books, I've read more than I think the last time I counted, I think I'm up to 113 personal finance books. Um, what I felt like was missing and was something that I had to really figure out is all the books kind of say the same type of things, right? Like live below your means,
Right.
be careful with debts. You know, some are more extreme and say debt is evil, and some are less extreme and say debt is a tool. But just
Right.
like be careful with debt and save for the future. Like all financial literacy book have those three
Yeah.
core components. And then slight differences on how they talk about that or where the author kind of falls on the scale of this is good versus this is bad.
Mhm.
But what I couldn't find was the book that sounded like me, like
Yep.
someone who was changing tax brackets, right? Someone who
Yep.
grew up here, but because of my education, because of the work that I do, could be here,
Mhm.
and what that means for how my relationship with money needed to be, and what that means for how I need to structure my budget. And it didn't give me, most of them say no to helping your family. You have to manage your budget first. And that is not a reality. Like
Yeah.
if my mother, if my sister, if my brother calls and needs something, we're going to make a plan. And if money is part of that, we're going to solve the problem.
Right.
And so I also needed a framework for figuring out how to include my family obligations in my budget. And almost none of the books talk about how to do that in a way that allows you to grow what you have at home while also supporting the people who matter to you.
Right.
And so I put that in. And frankly, when you're managing a lot of stuff, right? If you're managing your own household budget, maybe you already have kids, so you're managing childcare costs or just keeping them clothed and entertained.
Yep.
If you have aging parents, you might be thinking about what that means, saving for retirement, saving for a rainy day, wanting to take a vacation from time to time, not necessarily knowing when things get tight or change, what is the right order?
Mhm.
And so I suggest a very clear order of if you're starting out or starting over, start here,
Okay.
then here. Because I think that's what kind of gets people stuck when it comes to their budgeting. They're like,
Yep.
they believe that budgeting will limit them and means they can't have any fun in their life. And oh, no, 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 I have a lot of fun and it's on my budget.
Right.
And they're like, well, I have so many things or it's such a mess. I just don't even know where to start. So I give you a starting place. And
Okay.
then the book is actually like 30% worksheets. And that's because
Okay.
if you've never done this before, if you've never really done a budget, if you've never really explored why you think the things you think and feel the things you feel about money, it's hard to shift. And so I put a ton of exercises in the book. I actually was worried my editor was going to say, nobody's going to buy this book, is half of it. But it's because you have to practice it and you have to
Yeah.
practice it. You have to develop the skills and maybe use fake numbers before you feel okay to put your real numbers in
Yeah.
so that you feel good about the budgeting process because budget is not a bad word. It's
Right.
not.
Yeah. We actually just went through a huge shift ourselves when it comes to the budget. We've always, had like a spreadsheet. We keep track of our monthly expenses, or if we have quarterly or annual stuff, we break it down. And we've been doing that for a few years now, pretty much since I started the firm. We're like, we gotta be adults now and actually have a budget. And one of the hardest things, you kind of pointed this out, is we know that we need to have like some sinking funds. We've got to save for the rainy day. We've got to save for the vacations and, like Christmas stuff, and not just do it all at once. But it's a little overwhelming because in the moment you think, is that more important than like putting money away for retirement? And how do I work this in? So we've made some pretty serious changes recently and had to change our mindset, had to unlearn a lot of things. I'm curious, and you mentioned that unlearning kind of the bad practices. What would you say in all of your experience in writing the book and talking with people? What is the hardest thing for people to unlearn when they're trying to get their budget under control?
You know what it is? It's not so much that it's hard to unlearn it, it's the guilt, the
Mm,
shame, the
okay.
self-judgment. And so whenever I work with someone one-on-one or even in group settings, the thing that I try to really convey is like, look, when people know better, when you know better, when I know better, we do better.
Right.
So please do not beat yourself up for decisions you made in the past,
Hmm.
because that was probably the best decision you had, or you
Yeah.
didn't know that you had other decisions. So
Right.
we need to let that go. And this activity of exploring your money, of figuring out where your debt is and where it came from, and how we can make your budget work isn't about judging yourself.
Right.
So I need you to approach this with curiosity. Where is this coming from? Where is the money going? Why is this important? Or can we do something different? And if you feel like you're beating yourself up, take a piece of paper, write down all the reasons why you're mad at your former self or why you're judging your former self, and then throw it away, because it does
Yeah.
not serve us to be beating up on ourselves. It does not serve us to feel bad about ourselves when we're in the process of making the change for the better. And
Yeah.
so it's not so much the what, it's the how.
Hmm. I love that. It's like you writing down all the things and you like burn it or something. You're just like,
That's
get it
right.
out and get rid of it.
Get it out and get rid of it so we can move forward. Because
Yep.
the fact that you're even bought a book, even looked up a book, even listened to a
Yeah.
podcast, that means you're in the process of doing something super good. So don't stop your progress by beating yourself up about it. Like, let it go. Let
Yeah.
it go.
We used to do that all the time. When we were young and we never went through any type of a financial literacy thing, I don't feel like we really learned anything from our parents necessarily about budgeting or nobody ever talked to me about debt that I can remember. And so we racked up a lot of debt when we were younger and starting out. And that is something that we would beat ourselves up about and carried a lot of shame and, never really got vulnerable about it. So I can imagine there are a lot of people in that boat and it's a hard thing to get past.
Right. And I mean, if you are starting over or starting out, you literally may have only had bad choices
Yeah.
to choose from, right? Like, I know that there are definitely situations where my mother, for instance, had two really crappy choices. And so she did her best to choose the potentially less crappy of the
Right.
two, but she only had two crappy choices,
Yep.
right? And so it would be so unfair for me to be like, why did you make that bad decision, when really of the two that were available to me, it was the better
The
one,
best. Yeah.
right? And so if people can kind of get past that initial, like, that's really always the hardest part. It's not the what, because everyone's financial thing is different.
Hmm.
But if we can get them over that kind of emotional hump of beating themselves up and why didn't I, and I should have known. How would you have known if no one taught you? You're
Right.
learning it now, so let that go. Thank your past self for doing the best they could, because I'm pretty sure you probably were, and let's move forward.
Yeah. You have a lot of services that you offer, and you've kind of hinted at some of the different ones. I did not know that you had so many services until I went down the rabbit hole of your website. Um, you've got like obviously you're a keynote speaker, totally makes sense for what you're doing. But you've got some really unique workshops, including ones for kids and teens. Um, and I do want to talk about like teaching our kids financial responsibility a little bit. But before that, can you just go into a little bit of detail about the workshops and maybe target audiences for some of these?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I have a coach now, a business coach, because one of my goals for this year is to grow my business and to make it make sense to other people.
Mhm.
I think I shared with you earlier that I have lots and lots of things that I'm interested in.
Yeah.
And so because of that, sometimes people are not always sure, well, so are you a coach, or are you an educator, or are you a professor? And I'm like, yes, I'm all of
Mhm.
those
All of
things.
them.
But that isn't always clear. It kind of dilutes the message, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I'm working on in the next couple months is like, what is the main thing that people will be best served by,
Mhm.
so I can figure that out. But yes, I have several workshops, and part of me writing the book, writing this book actually only took me 127 days from the time I hired my editor and we finalized my outline to the time it was in my book, in my hand, was 127 days. But part of the reason it only took me 127 days, because I've been doing financial education
Right.
in all types of settings for a decade and a half. So I pulled notes from this workshop, or I pulled information from a slide I did, or I pulled notes from a talk that I gave, or from a coaching session and turned it into a chapter, right? And so the workshops that I have for kids are math, right? Because math can be really fun, especially when it's about something that matters. So
Yeah.
teaching kids a little bit about money and why your parents have these magic cards, but how they work and that there's money behind it. And that's how you get stuff. And you have to earn money. At least most of us in the US have to work in
Yep.
exchange for money, and what that means and what that can look like as a kid or as a teen or as an adult. So bringing these money concepts in a way that makes sense to kids,
Mhm.
because it's funny you said earlier we didn't learn that much from our parents. We learn about money from our parents almost the same way we learned about sex, where they tell us, no, seriously, where they
Yeah.
tell us two, maybe three things to avoid, right? Don't have sex, don't get credit cards, right?
Yep.
It's kind of like that, but then they
Yeah.
leave the rest open for you to figure out on your own or from your peers or just from observing. And so
Yeah.
that leaves a ton of room for error. And so if there are ways that you can bring parts of how you as a grown-up manage your money, good, bad, or ugly,
Yeah.
into the dinner conversation, into the car ride conversation, into the decision making that you're doing about which sports or activities they
Yeah.
are doing, then there are ways to get them exposed to the language of it so that when they hear it again, they're like, oh yeah, my parents, even if they didn't explain it, they at least, I've heard it before. It's not the
Right.
first time I've heard about debt. It's not the first time I've heard about a credit card. It's not the first time I've heard about saving for something.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the big piece that's missing when you give that example of like don't have sex and don't use credit cards is the why. Like everything behind it. Like it's missing. It's missing. And I try so hard when we have conversations with the boys to explain everything behind the scenes of like why we made a decision or why we said no about a decision. Um, and it does come up a lot. I mean, when you've got three boys who all want to play sports and it's the fees for it, the travel time, the snacks at games, all that stuff adds up, but they just want to play soccer and they don't understand all of that why behind it. So, yeah, that's that missing element that makes all the difference.
Mhm. And, I think one of the things that can help with anyone, no matter where they are, whether they're 5 or 55 and they're figuring out money, you can always learn more and you can do something different to
Mhm.
improve your financial situation, right?
Yeah.
And so if we give each other language and safe space to talk about it, in a lot of places, in a lot of families, in a lot of communities, talking about money is still not something you're supposed to talk about.
No.
And if you're not supposed to talk about it, how are you going to learn?
Right.
Because just because it's in a book doesn't mean it's right or right for you. Just because you saw it on TikTok doesn't mean that that is relevant for what you're trying to accomplish. And so you need to be in community with people and talk these things
Mhm.
out to like kind of check it. Like,
Yeah.
oh, TikTok told me this, or this book said this. Is that something you do? Is that something you've heard about? And so we have to get comfortable with talking about money.
Mhm. And we had to go through that. I mentioned that, we made a lot of big changes this year and we sat down with two separate couples from church and they both had two completely different mindsets. So there were a lot of similarities, but they took different approaches to things and we got super vulnerable. I mean, like, look, here's our budget, here's our debt, here's our expenses, here's our income.
Mhm.
It is hard to talk about those things. But
Mhm.
honestly, on the other side of it, it was the best decision we could have made
That's right.
because it holds us accountable
Mhm.
for certain things because we've got other people who love us and care about us who want to see us meet our goals. And it helped us to see the things we were missing or learn about the things that we had no idea were maybe a problem with our budget. And not that I'm going to go showing everybody my budget, but it really did help to get open about it.
Yeah.
So,
And the other piece of that too is being in the place to ask questions and listen.
mhm,
Remember that not everyone's situation is yours. And so it's okay to take what absolutely works and to leave what doesn't.
yeah.
And the cool thing, just like in your relationship, right? Like I'm married, I've been married for 10 years, and I have friends who all got married at similar times. Like it was a summer we had a lot of weddings to go to, right? And each of their marriages is slightly different about how they organize household tasks, about money, about how they do kid stuff, how they make decisions about the children,
Yep.
right? And the cool thing about relationships also applies to money is that, like, guess what? It only has to work for the people in the relationship.
Mhm.
So just because that couple does that and it totally works for them, doesn't mean it needs to work or will work over here. Same
Right.
thing with your money. Get advice, seek out information from people who might be doing things differently from you. And if it doesn't feel like it will work, that's okay.
Right.
If you're not sure, you can try it for a couple of months, 3 months, 6 months. And if it works, great, you learn something new. And if it doesn't, guess what? You can shift. You can
Yep.
shift things, you can do things differently. And it might take you a few tries in a budgeting method or a job searching method or a saving method to find the one that actually works for you.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Like, in fact, that's kind of the fun of it.
Yeah. Now, just I have one more question about the kids, teens, and then financial literacy, financial responsibility. Um, for parents that are watching, is there one small thing that we can do, whether it's day to day, week to week, month to month, to just start building that like healthy mindset for the kids when it comes to
Yeah, so
finance?
the first thing is to figure out and, like, take a 30-day period of just paying attention to how you talk about money
Mm,
with and around your kids.
okay.
Because sometimes we don't even realize that the only thing they hear from us is, "Nope, we can't afford that,"
Hmm.
or, "Nope, we're not doing that." And we just don't realize the things that they're hearing from us, right?
Yeah.
So the first thing to do is to just pay attention for 30 days. Anytime you say something, hear something, react to something that has to do with money, and kind of take a little inventory, make a note in your phone, if you're a journaly person, keep notes in your journal, and then look back like, these are all the things that maybe my kids heard me say about money. Is that how I want them to feel about money? Is that the voice that I want them to have in their head? If the answer is yes, cool. You don't need to make any changes. If you're like, "Ooh, I don't want them to grow up with that voice in their head," then you know that you want to shift it a little bit. So that's the first thing, is just pay attention to how you talk about money with and around your kids, and then
Okay.
see if that's actually what you want them. Because remember, when your kids are grown-ups, whether you believe it or not, especially if they're teenagers, your voice is the one that's
Oh yeah.
rolling in your head,
Yeah.
right?
They're
And so, like,
sponges. Yeah.
they're sponges, even if they don't act like it, even if they, be like, "Well, mom, I'm not listening to you." It's your voice is the one that's in their head. And so be a student of, okay, for the last 30 days, these are probably all the things they heard me say about money. Is that the voice I want in their head when they're not in my house anymore?
Right. I love that. That's great. Okay. Um, I have one other thing I was going to ask you about, and this is maybe I'm a little biased because I'm a small business owner, and so I'm going to ask you a question for small business owners. But how would your coaching or mentoring services help someone like me as a small business owner if I were either going to go through a growth stage, maybe I'm developing and I'm going to try to meet some goals, or if there's somebody out there who's going to start a business, what are some of the things that you can do with them to help in those situations?
The three things that my superpower is fallen is helping you get clear. Because when you are clear about what it is you want to accomplish and why you want to accomplish it, that puts so much fuel in your tank
Yeah.
that it's almost immeasurable. And so that clarity piece. So I love asking questions. And so I ask questions. I've gotten feedback and testimonials that the way that I ask questions really makes people think sometimes differently about what they've been planning or thinking about or talking about, so that they can see a different side of it.
Okay.
The second thing is we got to know the money, because even though, you know how some people are like, well, that's work me, or that's home me, or
Yeah.
that's church me, sweetie, there's really just one of you.
Yeah.
Like, yes, different parts of you and your personality and your style come out in those settings, but it's still only one of you. And so if your personal finances are organized, you have a much better chance that your business finances will be organized. And so we're going to work on your personal budget, especially because depending on where you are in the stage of your business, if you're just starting out, if you're in ideation, or if you're scaling, we might have to come up with a plan to help you bootstrap. That's where you basically
Yeah.
use the money you have coming from other things to slowly and strategically grow the business. We might figure out when it makes sense to take on debt or an investor. And
Mhm.
so, but in order to even know that, your money plan and
Yeah.
like has to be really, really clear, so we can figure out how much time you have, how much time you need, and how to bridge the gap in case there's a difference.
Gotcha.
And then
Okay.
the third thing is dot connecting. because business owners, just like new parents, should never be doing what they're doing in isolation. We are, as humans, we are meant to be in community. And so sometimes it's that one conversation you have with someone who's 6 months ahead of you or 1 year ahead of you that makes you realize, oh, I could be doing this.
Mhm.
And that would make all the difference. And so if you're in your corner by yourself, not having the benefit of talking with someone who are just a few months or even a year ahead of you, then you might be missing something that was so simple to them now, but would
Yeah.
completely change how you do. So you have to figure out how to be in community with other people who are in your lane, in your ecosystem. Maybe they're not business owners, maybe they're customers, maybe they're people who use products like the one that you want to put out.
Mhm.
But you like being able to connect dots to other people is really, really important to help you be successful and to feel good about what you're doing and to not feel lonely.
Right. Yeah, that's been huge. That last one has been huge for me over the last 3 years. Just, um, either having other professionals that are, like, in the same stage as me, where we're doing it together and we can bounce ideas off of each other, or being in coaching groups where the coach and other people in the groups have been there, been where I am at now and have had the, the insight that I never would have thought of.
Mhm.
So, yeah, that has really contributed to my growth over the last 3 years.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Is there anything else you want to share today? This has been like an amazing conversation.
No, this has been so fun. I don't know. I hope that something I said is valuable to your audience and that, they get something from listening.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining me today. I will put all of your contact information in the caption for the video. You can visit Darla's website to order her book. And then if you're looking for guidance on finances, you need a keynote speaker, you want to do a workshop, anything like that, you should strongly consider reaching out to her. And I just want to thank everyone for watching.